Welcome back to Lying Around with Earl, where we bring stories to life, one chapter at a time. Today, we continue with Chapter 8 of Banjo Strings and Anvil Rings. This chapter follows Jack as he makes a decision that will change the course of his life forever. It's a time of change, a time of choices. Jack, the eldest of his siblings, has never been one to sit still. But now, standing at the crossroads of duty and adventure, he's about to step into a world far beyond the rolling hills of home. Chapter 8, Jack. The sun hung low in the late September sky, casting a warm, golden light over the Stevens farm. The fields, freshly harvested, stretched out like a patchwork quilt, their earthy tones blending with the dense green of the surrounding forest. Cicadas droned lazily in the trees, their hum a constant reminder of the waning summer. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the walnut tree near the barn, carrying with it the faint scent of hay and damp soil, a scent that spoke of long days spent in the fields and the slow shift toward cooler autumn nights. Jack Stevens stood by the wagon, his hands steady as he adjusted the straps on the trunk he'd packed the night before. At 5 feet 6 inches, his compact frame didn't seem imposing, but the broadness of his shoulders and the quiet confidence in his movements spoke of years of labor on the farm. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the edges, tousled by the breeze, and his hazel eyes held a mix of excitement and something unspoken. Maybe hesitation, or perhaps the weight of what lay ahead. Jack turned to his sisters, Grace and Alice, standing side by side. Grace's auburn hair, pinned neatly back, shone with reddish undertones in the morning light, while Alice's strawberry blonde braid draped over her shoulder. At 16, Alice's petite frame seemed even smaller as she clutched her shawl tightly against the morning chill. Her brown eyes glistened with unshed tears, betraying the emotions she tried to hold back. Grace had known this day was coming, but knowing hadn't made it any easier. Jack had always been a steady presence in her life, someone she could rely on when things got tough. The thought of him leaving for the Navy filled her with a quiet ache, even as she admired his determination to see the world beyond their small corner of West Virginia. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, burning off the last of the morning mist that clung to the hollows in the valley. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and turned to the table, where a small glass bottle sat waiting. The tonic inside was a deep amber, its earthy scent faint but comforting. She'd spent the early morning hours gathering the last of the goldenrod and mint from the edge of the woods, blending them with honey and apple cider vinegar to create a remedy that would keep Jack strong and clear-headed during his travels. Steeling herself, Grace picked up the bottle and stepped outside. The late summer air was warm but carried the first hints of fall, a crispness that whispered of shorter days and cooler nights to come. Jack looked up as she approached, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're fussing again," he teased, his voice warm and familiar. Grace raised an eyebrow, holding up the bottle. "Call it fussing if you want, but you'll thank me for this when you're out at sea and feeling like you've lost your balance." Jack's grin softened as he took the bottle from her hands, turning it over to inspect the contents. "What is it?" "A tonic," Grace said simply. "It'll keep you strong, help with your nerves, and clear your head when things get overwhelming." "It's not magic, but it works," Jack chuckled, slipping the bottle into the pocket of his jacket. "You and your tonics. I don't know what we'd do without them." "You'd probably get by," Grace said, her tone light but her smile tinged with emotion. "But you'd be worse off for it." As Grace handed over the tonic, the gesture held a weight that went unspoken. The bottle wasn't just a remedy. It was a symbol of her care, her way of ensuring Jack took a piece of home with him. Jack's expression turned serious as he met her gaze, the easy grin fading into something deeper, more meaningful. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, and for a second, she couldn't find the words. Instead, she reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You'll take care of yourself, won't you?" Jack nodded, his voice steady. "I will, and I'll write as often as I can." "You'd better," Grace said, her tone softening. "And don't forget to use that tonic when you need it. I don't care how bad it tastes, it'll help." Jack laughed, the sound carrying across the yard like a balm against the bittersweet tension of the morning. "I'll use it, I promise." For a moment, they stood in silence, the rustling leaves and distant cluck of chickens filling the space between them. Grace looked at her brother, taking in the familiar lines of his face, the way he carried himself with quiet determination. She felt a pang of loss, but also a deep sense of pride. Jack was chasing his dreams, and she knew he'd make good on his promises. Their father's voice broke the stillness as he called from the barn, his gruff tone softened by the distance. "Jack, you about ready?" Jack glanced toward the barn, then back at Grace. "Guess that's my cue." Alice stepped closer, her voice small but insistent. "You'll write, won't you?" "You promised." Jack crouched slightly to meet her gaze, his hazel eyes softening. "Of course, I will, Carrot." He caught himself, his smile turning sheepish. "Alice, I'll write so much you'll get tired of hearing from me." Her lips quirked into a reluctant smile, but her eyes didn't lose their shine. "I won't get tired of it." Jack straightened, turning to Grace. His tone grew serious, and his grin gave way to a determined set of his jaw. "I meant what I said, Grace. Look after Ma and Pa while I'm gone. They're going to need you more than ever now." Grace nodded, her chin lifting slightly. "I will. You don't have to worry about us, Jack. You just take care of yourself." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his rough fingers a contrast to the gentleness of the gesture. "Thank you. And when I come back, I'll make sure you're taken care of too." "That's a promise." Grace's eyes shimmered, but she managed a faint smile. "Deal. But don't think I won't write to remind you of that promise." Their father, John Stevens, emerged from the barn, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. His face, lined with years of toil, bore a mixture of pride and worry. He approached Jack, his gait steady but deliberate, and extended a calloused hand. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Jack," he said gruffly, gripping Jack's hand firmly. "Don't let me down out there." "I won't, Pa," Jack replied, his voice steady as their hands parted. Their mother, standing quietly behind John, dabbed at her blue eyes with a handkerchief. Her petite frame seemed even smaller next to her husband's imposing build, but the love and strength in her expression were unmistakable. "Stay safe, son. And don't forget, God's watching over you." Jack stepped forward, wrapping her in a firm hug. "I know, Ma. I'll be all right." The family climbed into the wagon, the wooden wheels creaking as John guided it toward the train station. The hills stretched out on either side of the narrow dirt road, dotted with wildflowers and bordered by patches of dense forest. Birds flitted among the trees, their songs weaving through the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they arrived at the station, Jack climbed down and retrieved his trunk, setting it on the weathered platform. The train stood waiting, its iron sides gleaming faintly in the morning light. Steam hissed from its engine, curling upward like a ghostly ribbon. Alice stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Goodbye, Jack. Don't forget us." Jack knelt slightly, pulling her into a hug. "Never, Alice. You're stuck with me, no matter how far away I go." Grace lingered behind, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When Jack turned to her, she smiled faintly, her composure steady but her emotions visible in the tightness of her jaw. "Go see the world, Jack," she said softly, "and make sure you come back." "I will," he promised, pulling her into a quick hug before stepping back. The train whistle blew, sharp and commanding, slicing through the cool morning air. Jack hoisted his trunk and climbed aboard, pausing to lean out the window. He waved to his family, his hazel eyes scanning each face as if memorizing the moment. "Take care of each other," he called, his voice carrying over the sound of the train. The wheels groaned into motion, and the train began to pull away, picking up speed as it rolled down the track. Jack leaned out until his family became specks against the backdrop of hills and valleys, then settled into his seat. His heart swelled with a mix of excitement and longing as he watched the familiar landscape fade into the distance. The mountains of West Virginia stood like silent guardians, their peaks veiled in mist. The valleys, cradling streams that sparkled in the morning light, seemed to whisper promises of home. Jack stared out the window, carrying the image of his family and the hills of his childhood with him as he ventured into the unknown. And so, With his mind made up, Jack takes his first step toward a future beyond the farm, beyond his family, beyond everything he's ever known. Will this choice bring him fortune or regrets? Only time will tell. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. And if you've got thoughts on Jack's big decision, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear them.